Axis and Allies 1940 2nd edition tutorial.
In this video I'll be teaching you the basics of Axis and Allies, and hopefully by the time you're done watching these you'll have a better idea of what you can do to win your first game. This game has a much steeper learning curve and it'll take some time to get a grasp of. It'll probably take a game or so for you to understand the dynamics, but hopefully this should help you along in getting a better idea faster. Now, to describe this game, I would describe it as, if you ever played Risk, imagine that on steroids. This is essentially that. This is an extremely complicated strategy game taking place during the pivotal moment of the invasion of France during World War II. So without further ado, let's begin our tutorial. So, welcome to my virtual board. I won't be using my actual board until later when we introduce land units, but for now, we're going to be sticking with just the board because, to be honest, that in and of itself can be pretty intimidating. Because one, it's big, and two, it has a lot of things on it that look kind of confusing. So, of course, you've probably noticed at this point that there's water and land tiles, and that there's countries and everything else. And a few questions that may have popped into your mind as the screen panned across the world there is, why are some areas black while others are blue, and why are some territories red and others are white and green, and so on and so forth? These are very good questions, and the answer to that question is these colors represent different nations that existed at the time just before Germany invaded France in 1940 during World War II. Now, Germany is represented as black, the Soviet Union is represented as red or maroon, Japan is represented as orange, the United States is represented as a dark military green, China is represented as a light, kind of almost whitish green. Both of the United Kingdoms in the Pacific and in the European map are tan or whitish. Italy is brown, and Anzac is gray, while France is blue. The highlighted circles shown here represent the original owner of the territory at the start of the game. It should be mentioned that there is one exception in Asia with China and Japan, but we can get to that in a later installment. Now, right above the territory name, you'll see a number with a circle around it. All that means is the territory is worth that much. The higher the number, the more worth the territory has. Now, this number deals more with the economics of the game, which we'll be getting into in the next video. For now, all you should know is that that number represents the value of the territory. Now, looking at the board, it can be a little bit overwhelming at first because there's so many different nations and you have no idea as to who's fighting who and what the general goal of the game is. But don't worry, it's simple enough. I'll run you through the context really quick. Contextually, the Axis, Japan, Italy, and Germany are partners in crime, aggressors to expand their power. The Allies at the beginning are in no way united, and really only France and Britain are united against Germany and Italy. However, as time rolls on, the Allies begin to realize that they need to fight together and stop the Axis from expanding. Now, you guys might have noticed that not all the countries have colors. Some of them are gray, or they have a grayish hue. Even if you only know a little bit about European history, you might have an awareness that Switzerland is always neutral. This is a good indicator that all countries that are colored like it are also neutral. In general, neutral countries just want to stay out of the fight. However, not all of the countries are strictly neutral. Some are slated towards the Axis, while others are slated towards the Allies. And that brings me to my next point. There are two types of neutrals in Axis and Allies. There are strict neutrals, and there are biased neutrals. If you see pro-Allies or pro-Axis under a neutral, that is exactly what it means. They sympathize with them. All pro-ally and pro-axis means is that if you're an allied power and you move into a pro-allied country, the country will not fight you and its armies will join your ranks. If you're a pro-allied country and you move into a pro-axis country, then that pro-axis country will become hostile and fight your invading troops. The same is true for the axis powers, but vice versa, of course. If you don't see pro-axis or pro-ally under the country's name and they're neutral, then they're a strict neutral, and that means that attacking them will lead to all other strict neutrals in the game turning against your side. So if you're an Axis and you attacked a strictly neutral country, all other strict neutrals in the game will become pro-ally. And vice versa, of course. The only other gray territories in this game that are cause for concern are the Impassable Zones, which I'll highlight in green here. By merits of being impassable, these zones cannot be crossed through or traveled over by any units, and these impassable zones include the Himalayas, the Sahara Desert, and the Pripyat marshes in Russia. Now, looking at the ocean tiles in this game, you might have noticed some strange black markings in specific water tiles, but not every water tile. The explanations for these are pretty simple. One of the water tiles is the kamikaze tile, while the other water tile type is the convoy tile. We'll talk more in depth about these later, but for now, all you need to know is that kamikaze tiles only apply to Japan, and convoy tiles affect the economy of nations. If you own land next to a convoy tile, you want to try to protect it to protect your nation. Another important aspect of water tiles are straits and canals, which are used primarily to get ships through them. Straits are natural, while canals are man-made. In Axis and Allies, whoever owns these straits and canals has the advantage at sea. The various straits and canals of the game are as follows: the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, the Turkish Straits, Strait of Gibraltar, and the Danish Straits. These straits and canals allow ships to move directly through them, if you own them. In order to be granted passage through straits and canals, you have to own certain territories surrounding them. For the Suez Canal, you must own Egypt and Transjordan. To pass through the Panama Canal, you must own Central America. To go through the Turkish Straits, you have to own Turkey, kind of hard to do, seeing as though it's a strict neutral. In order to pass through the Strait of Gibraltar, you must own Gibraltar. And in order to pass through the Danish Straits, you have to own Denmark. Another question that people commonly ask when they're starting this game is, can anyone own ocean tiles like other players might own land tiles? And the answer is no, you cannot permanently own a sea tile. One final thing to note about sea tiles is islands. Within a single sea zone, there can be up to 2 or 3 islands, each of which can be owned independently by different belligerents. Islands that have no name label, such as the one near Sweden, aren't technically a part of the game and you cannot land on them. Island groups, on the other hand, are a group of islands, but they're considered one territory. One more thing I think is noteworthy to mention is that there are territories that can connect with each other across the Global Edition. So if you're playing the Global Edition, certain sea zones and certain land tiles can connect with each other. That's pretty much the extent of which we need to go into it. For which sea zones connect to other sea zones, and for which land tiles connect to other land tiles, I will write in the description section below which sea zones and which land tiles connect to each other, just for the sake of saving time. So, let's conclude. The board is big, but don't let that overwhelm you. We just covered it in less than 10 minutes. There are sea and land tiles. Pretty simple. Colors and circular flags mean different nations. The circled numbers in each territory represent the economic value or worth of that territory. It's helpful to know the context of the game, which is essentially Axis versus Allies. If it makes it easier, the Axis want to take over the world and make it theirs. They're the evil villain petting the cat, and the Allies are the superheroes. Land with gray implies neutral. Just remember, Switzerland is gray and never wants to deal with anything. You should also remember that there are 2 kinds of neutrals: strict neutrals and bias neutrals. Strict neutrals are against entering the war entirely, while bias neutrals can be swayed to either join you or will fight against you if you try to enter their territory. There are a total of 3 impassable territories in the board, which include the Himalayas, the Sahara Desert, and the Pripyat Marshes in Russia. In the ocean, there are special black tiles which represent kamikazes and convoys. We also covered straits and canals and their function and how they work. Finally, we covered islands in the 3 different types: island groups, 2 different islands in one sea zone, and islands that aren't even a part of the game. No one can own sea tiles permanently. Finally, we just glanced over the connected territories between the Global Edition boards. So that about wraps it up. Hopefully this brings you to a closer understanding of how to play the game, and maybe when you first play this game you will prove to be exceptionally more well informed on all the people you are facing. So, see you next time. Ciao.